The biggest thing that motivates me to get up in the morning is to go to the Transformation Center and interact with people. I find that work inspiring. When I see other people with mental health diagnoses sharing their stories and their experiences, I am in return inspired. Before I started on the path of recovery, when I was younger, I used to behave in ways that were not safe to other individuals or to myself. I hurt myself and I hurt other people as well. I often threw things, hit things, and I had a history of hearing voices and experiencing hallucinations. I believe this started when I was around 10. When I started hearing these voices, I figured this was pretty normal, and I thought everyone heard these voices and it was just that nobody really talked about it. Later, these voices became a lot more negative. Initially, they started delivering a more positive message, and I felt that they were keeping me company. But as the voices turned more negative and I felt that they were turning against me, that became an entirely different issue. When I was young, I went to a camp for deaf kids. Our counselors wanted to give us the liberating experience of having a whole month without having to wear our hearing aids. But the experience for me was deeply unpleasant, because even without my hearing aids, I continued to hear these intrusive voices. But I never bothered to ask anyone else if they were hearing voices as well. And then after camp, I went and saw my therapist, and I asked her if this was normal to hear these voices, even if you're not wearing a hearing aid. And she told me it was not normal. In fact, it was actually a mental health problem. The fact that I was hearing these voices. In looking back, I was around 11 or 12 when I started getting involved in drugs and alcohol. I was looking for an escape from my family and from my home life, which was an abusive situation. And in fact, there was abuse in the school environment as well. And the drugs were a trigger in my hallucinations. I thought if I took drugs and alcohol, and used drugs and alcohol, that the hallucinations would quiet down. But in fact, the opposite happened, and that made it worse. And in looking back, I realized that I was very much on the wrong path. And I actually realized that at the time, and stopped using drugs and alcohol. When I'd get angry, I'd often hurt other people and myself. And those voices that I was hearing, particularly the negative ones, were influencing those types of self-harming behaviors and the harming of other people. I finally was willing to seek help to remedy the situation. Quite a while ago, after I tried to commit suicide in front of my therapist, I was placed in a state hospital. I ended up being taken off my medication, and the hallucinations got a lot worse. I would say the darkest point in my life was when I really tried to take my own life. And I'm fortunate to be alive today. After I came to from the suicide attempt, I realized I wasn't ready to go to heaven. And God isn't ready to take me. And I recognize that there are other people in my life who are in fact trying to help me. And I still, in fact, had a glimmer of hope. I just had to light a match in hopes that the sparks would lead to a flame and that I could recover. In that darkest time, I was able to find motivation to continue living. And again, when I was younger, I was involved with a pretty bad group of people. I remember when I was around 4 or 5, I saw this light in the shape of a figure. And this figure told me that I needed to leave this group, and that I would, in fact. And that gave me hope. And then, when I was 7, I went to Sunday school, and I learned more about Jesus. And I realized that Jesus had visited me when I was small. Jesus was in fact that bright white figure, telling me and guiding me to take a more positive path in my life. And I eventually did leave that bad group of people. And I think it was because of the message that Jesus had given me when I was young. I don't believe in organized religion. But I do have my own belief that Jesus is there and God is present, and that God made this world. And this was not a one-time occurrence. Jesus has visited me multiple times in my life. I would say 2 or 3, and has given me hope. And I realize that I can pass this hope along to other people in my life as well. I've identified that one of my strengths is having strong willpower. When I put my mind to something, I go for it and generally achieve it. And that's a part of my recovery story because I truly, deeply wanted to improve and get better, and I did. When I was in the hospital, I was given a diagnosis by my therapist, but I didn't feel a connection to this. It felt more like a superficial label. And I was puzzled. I didn't really know what it meant. It was just being labeled. And then later people explained to me more thoroughly. And I was able to understand my diagnosis and myself better as a result. I felt like a lot of people discriminated against me and looked down on me. And when this happened, I felt like my life choices were limited. Recently, I joined a deaf peer group called Atrium. This was a 10-week program, and every week I would learn something related to healing from trauma and the imbalances it creates in your mind, body, and spirit. Atrium really focuses on creating a sense of equilibrium and looking at a more mindful and integrated way of being. Your body is always looking to seek balance. I hurt myself, and using drugs and alcohol was initially my attempt at seeking balance within myself. But it was hurting me and others at the same time. It wasn't until I stopped using drugs and alcohol and connected with the women at the battered women's shelter and recognized that it was not helping me to stay in an abusive situation, which was in fact my home life. The battered women's shelter that I was a part of was a 5-month program. And then I was transferred to a group home, but it was not deaf-friendly. It didn't work out, and I went back to the battered women's shelter. The waiting list was unbelievable. It was about 2 years that I was without a home of my own, no place to call my own. So I decided to start looking for an apartment with a peer from the battered women's shelter. Finally, I found one after a 3-month search. And I've lived in that same place for over 20 years now. To be honest, I was scared because this was going to be my first time living on my own. And at that time, there was no support services for deaf people who were living independently. I had my therapist, I had my DMH case manager, the case manager from the Commission for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing, but those were just 9 to 5 supports. There was no support system at night or on weekends. And when I connected with my friend, that was so valuable because she was in fact available as a peer on the nights and weekends to fill in the gaps. For me, it doesn't actually matter if the facilitator is deaf or not. Or if the group is mixed in hearing status. The most important thing to me is having communication access. So making sure there's an interpreter or a deaf person facilitating. My number one priority is communication access. I got my associate's degree at Bunker Hill Community College. I had to work incredibly hard to get that degree because of my mental health. And I was in and out of school because of the challenge I was facing. But I finally got a degree with honors. That was one of my largest personal goals, was to graduate and successfully get that degree. And I'm very proud of myself for having done it. My message to all of you is simply to have hope. Sometimes there's just a tiny seed of hope. And if you nurture it and feed it and give it water and sunlight, it'll grow. And if you have willpower, use it. You can recover. Thank you.